Tonight, the Nolan Wells investigation into the death of a shining star, Nolan Wells, has an altercation witness emerged. A witness that claims she saw an altercation at Horn Island.
I have not spoken publicly about this before, but I witnessed an altercation involving Nolan Wells from a boat nearby. What I saw has stayed with me, and I believe it's important information. I have provided or intend to provide my account to the appropriate investigators because Nolan's family deserves the truth. Out of respect for the ongoing investigation, I won't speculate beyond what I personally observed. While I was on the boat near the area, I witnessed an altercation involving Nolan Wells and several other individuals. I saw what appeared to be an argument that escalated after there was a dispute involving Nolan's phone. I heard Nolan yelling for his phone to be returned. The argument continued after the group reached shore, and I observed a physical fight involving Nolan and multiple people. I also observed a young woman telling them to stop. At that point, I left the area because the situation had appeared to be getting worse. I did not remain long enough to witness what happened afterward. Everything beyond what I personally observed would be speculation, so I cannot honestly say what occurred after I left. Then she said she messaged one of the individuals that she saw, "Hey, I just want to say I was a passenger on another boat and I saw the argument between you guys and will go to the police with this information. I also have video footage. My husband doesn't show much, but it shows the argument that was taken and how you guys were upset at Nolan because of the young lady."
Public's urgency to know what happened to Nolan. But we are not taking time for time's sake. We are taking the time required to complete the work this investigation demands. Since Nolan was reported missing, local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies have worked around the clock investigating what happened to him. Every piece of evidence must be examined. Every credible lead must be followed to its conclusion. Every witness interview must be analyzed in context of all other evidence. The pressure for answers does not change what the work requires. Our responsibility to Nolan and our community is to complete this investigation thoroughly, carefully, without compromise, supported by the evidence and worthy of the confidence of the people we serve. I also understand that many people have questions about why more information has not been released publicly. In Mississippi, the rules of professional conduct restrict the information a prosecutor can release during an investigation. Our restraint in communicating facts and evidence is not an effort to keep the truth from the public. It is an effort to protect the integrity of this investigation and the grand jury proceeding.
It could change everything, especially if the video is time-stamped. Straight out to veteran trial lawyer, defense attorney Philip Dubay joining me. He is joining us out of LA, formerly in the public defender's office. They try a ton of cases. Philip, first of all, has she turned it into police? She said she was. If she hasn't, I give her no credibility at all. Look, I want this to be true. Why? Because I want the video. I want to see the timestamp on the video. I want to see, was he still on Horn Island at 4:30 when his acquaintances on the Triton boat left? I want that video. And if she hasn't brought this forward to LE, law enforcement, then it means nothing to me. I mean, if I know a young man turns up dead in the water, and I know there's a controversy surrounding this, I mean, we know she knows that because she's gone online and posted it, then why not hand it over to police?
Agreed. And it should go to the grand jury for part of their investigation. But I got to tell you, if I were cross-examining her, should this even go to trial, the first question I'd ask her on that 4th of July, what she had been drinking. Before that video got activated, everybody would want to
put him up.
Drinking and smoking. You know how many people were partying?
Okay, man. Have you lost your mind? You defend criminal cases. I bet everybody you put on the stand has either been high, drunk, or worse during the altercation. Well, every witness is not a nun, a priest, or a virgin. Everybody on Horn Island was drinking, man. What are you talking about? I don't care if she took a drink. I want the video.
You want the truth, is what you want. You want the truth. And let's be
Yeah, and that
clear.
would be the video.
Remember, Nancy,
Okay.
the fight is not consistent with
Brandon
the end.
Tatum is joining us. So after all that, all you have to say is, was she drinking? That's your takeaway from that. Joining me is Brandon Tatum, former police officer, Tucson, now star of The Officer Tatum on YouTube, who famously has interviewed the acquaintances who all say they had nothing to do with it. Let's just put that out there. He's interviewed them extensively. I want to talk about not what you want to talk about, Brandon Tatum, which is they had nothing to do with this, because I met them and I believe them. So noted. Can we talk about a potential witness to an altercation? And she seems to suggest it was over Katie. Why? Don't know what the altercation was. Maybe it was, hey, leave her alone and get on the boat. Or leave her alone, she's my girlfriend. Or it could be anything. But if there is a witness placing Nolan seemingly in the water, I can't tell that, but having an argument with another person, a partier at Horn Island, that is significant. It could prove or disprove your friend's timeline.
Well, Nancy, I think that it's a big obstacle to climb here because I've never heard of this altercation whatsoever. Nobody that I've talked to have alluded that this altercation was real. And also Katie, whom I saw her text messages, she didn't even say this altercation occurred. What I will say is that if I was an investigator in this investigation, I want to hear that. I want to be able to compare that information to other things that we may have or other witness statements. But I don't think it's significant because it doesn't show if Nolan Wells was actually killed in that altercation. She's claiming that there was an altercation between him arguing with somebody else. There was a potential fight, but that doesn't get me to how did he drown? How did he get in the water? And how did he not recover and come home to his family? So I would take that into consideration. I would compare that to the other interviews that I've done, but I don't think it's significant whatsoever. However, I would be incredibly skeptical because there's no other statements that I've heard from anybody that comes even close to an altercation with Nolan Wells and others over a girl.
Number one, he's dead shortly after an alleged altercation with another male. We think over a woman. See, in my world, I put together both circumstantial and direct evidence. Direct evidence would be, for instance, DNA or a fingerprint. Circumstantial evidence is the timing of the alleged altercation and his death. Right?
Nancy,
so it's hard for me to believe that there's some kind of altercation on Horn Island just before he dies. And they were not connected. That's hard for me to believe that.
Well, Nancy, she's not saying he lost the fight. She's not saying that he got beat up. If you look at the autopsy, there's no clear signs of blunt force trauma to his face or any of the vital areas that could kill him. So it doesn't appear that there's any indication that he lost a fight, that there was enough trauma in this particular fight that would lead to his death. And when you look at the autopsy, there is no blunt force trauma to his face. There is no lacerations or damages to the back of his head. This is redness that was underneath the skin.
Oh, wait, are you looking at the screen? Because I'm looking at a big red mark on the back of his head.
Yeah, but this is underneath the skin. This is not a big red gash that's in the back of his head, which would be consistent with blunt force trauma. This is something that occurred underneath the skin that could have been from pooling of blood after his death due to,
Okay, I need to explain something.
I'll let the experts talk about specifics, but it doesn't appear that.
Okay, let's do that. But I want everyone to understand why Officer Tatum is here. Officer Tatum and Philip Dubé and others on our panel tonight are taking a particular side, right? It's called cross-examination, and it is similar to what happens in court. A theory emerges, a line of questioning emerges, and the other side tests it with fire under cross-examination. And then, hopefully, you get to the truth. Right now, we're talking about an alleged eyewitness to an altercation just before Nolan Wells is dead. If she has not handed this over to the police, it doesn't mean a hill of beans to me. But Tatum has a good idea, and that is let's let an expert discuss it. To Joseph Scott Morgan, death investigator, professor of forensics, Jacksonville State University. You can see him now on a hit podcast. It's on YouTube, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joe Scott, if there had been not a blunt force trauma that Officer Tatum is describing, but a fist fight, if there had been a fist fight, plus body in water for multiple days, body decomposition, would you expect to see red marks on the hands at that juncture, on the face? What would you expect if there had been a fisticuffs?
Yeah, you would see, well, first off, above discolored areas, like consistent with contusions. If there are facial strikes or just body blows, you can actually see abraded areas over the surface of his fingers, and these are very subtle sometimes. And if there is decomposition, which we believe there is, particularly per the second autopsy that was performed, he didn't make note of this. And can I go one more step with this? And this is kind of graphic, but people need to understand this. This physician that did the second autopsy actually did what's referred to as a coronal sectioning of the face. So there were multiple incisions made into Nolan's face in this autopsy, this second autopsy. And this guy didn't see anything. He didn't see anything that was of import relative or indicative of blunt force trauma. And I would think that if there was contact, particularly if he's fighting a group of people, these sorts of things, you're going to have injuries probably on the leading edges, or what we refer to as the blade of the arm right here on the forearm, the back of the hands, the knuckles, those points of contact. And certainly if there's facial strikes going on with him, which we find with blunt force trauma many times with fisticuffs, as you say, you'll see these strikes, you'll see marks on the face. There's nothing to indicate that in the second autopsy. Now, what the state has, I don't know, but I do know this. I know they're saying they're done with the autopsy and that it's complete, which means the gross findings in the autopsy room, the tox, the histology, that means that autopsy report is complete. They just hadn't released their findings yet.
And speaking of that, Joe Scott Morgan, I've heard the same, that the autopsy is complete.
Yeah.
There are reports that there is no cocaine in Nolan's system. That's uncorroborated reports.
Okay.
But a good source. No cocaine in the system.
Yep.
Joe Scott, when the body has been in the elements, such as the water, for that long, how can I confirm if he had been drinking or not?
Oh, you can still pull a BA, blood alcohol, or blood ethanol level, as it's referred to. And again, Nancy, we're not talking about someone that has been down for weeks and weeks. We can still do the BA, and it can come from urine, blood. We can still draw urine and find it pretty effectively. You'll have what's referred to as qualitative. We've talked about this before, and I know you understand that, but so our friends understand, you have a qualitative amount, which they say, yes, it is present. And then you have a quantitative amount where they do the measurement of the BAC, the blood alcohol content. Just think about DWI, DUI, wherever you're from, those levels. And then we get up to those lethal levels. That's really what I'm interested in relative. And yeah, I'm interested in any of the other toxicological findings you might have relative to anything illicit or illicit drugs, but particularly with alcohol, because that has been kind of this thing that has been said over and over and over again. Well, let me see it. I want to know what the blood alcohol level was like. And historically, I would like to know what his level of experience has been with alcohol. As you well know, because of cases you've worked on in the past, Nancy, if you're a lightweight, if you've never had anything to drink and you start taking on copious amounts of alcohol, and you're kind of a neophyte in this area, it can have very, very lethal outcomes.
Let me understand. Joe Scott Morgan joining us, star of Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan on YouTube and death investigator. When I'm asking you, even if the body has been in the elements for a period of days, can I still get a blood alcohol? Maybe not from urine, but you certainly can't do a blow test, but can you take human tissue from one of the organs and extract a blood alcohol from human tissue?
It'd be very difficult. Generally, the liver is the best candidate. We'll spin that down. We'll take a section of it, spin it down, and liquefy it. But again, I submit to you, Nancy, that he has not been down long enough to compromise the ability to get at least
Get
a
a
quantitative amount. Yeah, to get a BA.
Okay. To Philip Dubé joining me, a veteran trial lawyer, defense attorney out of the LA jurisdiction. I'm not quite sure why you're so focused on who had been drinking. Let's take a look at the video. Let me answer that for you. Everybody was drinking. Okay, everybody had a snootful. So, even someone drinking can see an altercation, Dubé.
No, of course you can. And I can see that crowd of people out there. It was a bustling, hot 4th of July afternoon. But who's to say that the people that she saw included Nolan Wells? And that's why you got to get into her ability to perceive and recollect being impacted by intoxicants such as alcohol. I would want to know if she had imbibed. I really would. Not to mention, the autopsy findings thus far do not reflect any type of physical insults or injury to his body. At most, what you have are
I'm asking
signs.
you about your fixation on the witness having been drinking. Joe Scott Morgan has already addressed the body. I'm talking to you about the alleged witness.
Yeah. If she had in fact been drinking, I do believe, unless they really have a video showing him in HD quality, showing that he was in a fight, then I would call her ability to perceive, recollect, and even state that there was an altercation going on in her presence.
You know, Brandon Tatum joining us, Officer Tatum on YouTube. I've cross-examined a lot of witnesses, and I cross-examined them exactly on that. How far away were you? Did you know the target? Were you familiar with them? Was your vision obstructed by anything? Were you wearing glasses? Were you wearing sunglasses? What time of the day? I mean, I could go on and on and on. But unless you have a nun, a priest, or a virgin on the stand, or maybe Angel Gabriel might come down and testify, you have to take your witness as you find them. And I'm sure you've had a lot of drunk witnesses in Tucson, to everything from a bar fight to a murder to a dope deal. Look, I'd say a good 50% of witnesses were drunk at one time or the other. That doesn't mean they didn't see what they saw.
Well, from a law enforcement perspective, this is not cross-examination on the stand. This is us. What I would deal with a witness is right on the scene, and I'm not too concerned of whether the person is drunk or not. I'm not going to test their blood alcohol level on the scene. I want to know specifically, what did you see? What are the identifying markers that you have to say that this is Nolan? If the person can describe them, maybe we'll do a show up. If we have like a video or a picture or something, we could show them and say, hey, does this match the person you think that was here? Then we'll have a good perspective. But there is a challenge here, because you do have to identify him. You can't just say it was a black man out there with curly hair and I think it was Nolan. You're going to have some clear identifying markers that this is Nolan, and then you have to identify the people he was fighting with and the girl. And I think this person is going to have a big challenge. I saw this text message. We reached out to the girl on her social media. She never responded to us. I don't know if she ever really sent it in to the police, but it is problematic, in my opinion, if she hasn't. If you're going to say somebody is going to spend time in jail, or you are alluding to the fact they've committed a crime, and the fact now that we know that Nolan did not survive being out there at Horn Island, and you never submitted that to law enforcement, there's a potential that that's tampering with evidence. If you have evidence of a crime and you're withholding that from law enforcement, and you knowingly and intentionally are doing that, that could be very problematic for a person who claimed to be a witness.
No. Morally, it's wrong. But there is no duty under the law that you have to report yourself as a witness, that you have to volunteer information. You can stand on the side of a pool and watch somebody drown and do nothing unless you have a fiduciary capacity. And it's not a crime in our jurisprudence. So nothing is compelling her under the law to come forward. However, interesting, she did post it. She did identify herself. She did say she was going to police. And that would be my first line of cross. Did you take this to the police? And if she said no, all HELL break out in that courtroom. If you have information like this and you don't go to the police, no,
Nancy,
no. Fur would fly. Fur would fly. You ever seen a dog fight? That's what I mean by that. Fur would fly. So that would be a line of cross-exam. Hold on. Something else. Before I go out to Susan Hendricks, Jeff Shetler, and Ben Dobrin, now information that there is, in fact, a criminal investigation.
Hearing that somebody who has an inside source is saying the DA's office in Mississippi is now looking at the Nolan Wells case as a criminal investigation and no longer an accidental drowning. Now, we can only pray that this is true. Obviously, we can't celebrate. We can't get excited at all because I have not seen Ben Crump announce this. It is not being reported by any other major media sources, but there are rumblings.
From Sam Crouppen. All right. I would like to point out that his source is a, quote, little birdie. Little birdies are saying that an inside source says the DA's office is now looking into the Nolan Wells as a criminal investigation. I can't put that up on the stand. Susan Hendricks joining me, investigative journalist and author of Down the Hill, My Descent into the Double Murder in Delphi. Susan, you get laughed out of court if your witness said, a little birdie told me, number one, that's hearsay, but a little birdie?
Yeah, exactly. It makes me wonder, did that woman, those text messages about some sort of altercation, is the grand jury analyzing this as we speak? Because finally the DA came out and said, look, I can't release anything that's going on, but let it be clear, and I'm paraphrasing, that we are investigating this with a grand jury.
Susan Hendricks, you're absolutely right. She states most recently, this is the elected district attorney, my obligation and commitment is to present the grand jury with all the evidence collected in the case in order for them to reach a decision based on a thorough investigation, complete evidence presentation, the actual truth, and an understanding of the law. I'm obligated to do so in keeping with the law and the rules of the court. She goes on to state, I stand firmly on the rule of law and my ethical obligation. That is what the people of Jackson County elected me to do. I will present the grand jury with a thorough, complete, and fair investigation into the death of Nolan Wells. Now, is there a criminal investigation? According to some sources, there is. We keep hearing there is no criminal investigation. To Dave Mack, Crime Stories investigative reporter, what is the truth of it tonight?
Nancy, it hasn't been announced that there's a criminal investigation, but it just stands to reason that they are doing a full investigation into the death of Nolan Wells. At this point, we don't have a cause of death, Nancy. They have not released the reports on the autopsy that was done by the state, completed weeks ago. We don't know anything. Nothing's been released. So whether they're doing a criminal investigation or not, I think it stands to reason they are investigating to every piece of evidence they can find to determine what happened and what they can present, they being investigators, to the grand jury.
All right, y'all. Now that you've watched all of that, let's talk. Because I don't know about you, but after watching those clips all the way through, I don't think the biggest question tonight is simply, was there an altercation? The bigger question is, what can actually be proven about what happened after Nolan was last supposed to be with the people on that boat? Because that's where this entire story gets complicated. And I want to take our time with this. We're not going to rush through it. We're not going to grab one sentence from that 20-minute clip package and immediately announce that we've solved the case. That's not what we're doing. We're going to go piece by piece, Because tonight, we have several different things happening at the same time. We have a woman who says she witnessed an altercation involving Nolan. We have a claim that there may be video of that altercation. We have messages allegedly connected to that witness account. We have questions about the timing of the boats leaving Horn Island. We have claims that Nolan may have been seen on the island after some of those boats had already departed. We have a completed state autopsy whose findings have not been publicly released. We have a district attorney talking about a grand jury. And we have a continuing debate over whether this should be understood as an accidental drowning or whether investigators are looking at something more complicated. And y'all, that's a lot. So let's slow it down, because there is one thing I want everybody to understand before we go any further. A new witness does not automatically solve this case. A video does not automatically solve this case. A grand jury does not automatically mean somebody is going to be arrested. And an argument does not automatically mean a homicide occurred. But if the witness account is authentic, if the video is authentic, if Nolan can be independently placed at that location at that time, and if those pieces fit with other evidence investigators already have, then suddenly, you have something investigators have to take very seriously. That's the difference. We're not saying, this proves it. We're saying, this needs to be investigated. And honestly, that's where I think the conversation should have been from the beginning. Now let's go back to the beginning. Nolan Wells went to Horn Island. He went there during the 4th of July period. He was with friends. The group eventually left. Nolan did not return home with them. And that's the basic fact that keeps bringing us back to the same question. What happened during the time between Nolan's last confirmed movements and the discovery of his body? That's the gap. And that gap is where all of these new questions live. Because if we can establish exactly where Nolan was, who was around him, what time it happened, and what happened immediately afterward, then we can start closing that gap. And that's why I'm so interested in this alleged witness. Not because I'm ready to believe every word she says. I'm not. I'm interested because she is claiming something very specific. She's not simply saying, I saw Nolan on the island. She's saying she witnessed an altercation. She's describing an argument. She's saying the argument involved Nolan's phone. She's saying she heard Nolan asking for his phone to be returned. She's saying the dispute escalated. She's saying there was a physical confrontation. And she's saying she saw a young woman attempting to stop it. Those are specific claims, and specific claims can be tested. That's important. Because if somebody says, I have a feeling something happened, there's not much investigators can do with that. But if someone says, I was on this boat, at approximately this time, in this location, I saw this person, I saw these people, I saw this particular interaction, and I have video. Now, investigators have something to work with. Now you can ask, what boat were you on? Where exactly were you? Who else was with you? What time was it? How far away were you? What were the weather conditions? Was anything obstructing your view? Did you know Nolan before that day? How did you identify him? What exactly did you hear? What exactly did you see? How long did you watch? What happened immediately before the confrontation? What happened immediately afterward? Did you record anything? When was the recording created? Was it edited? Was it sent to anyone? Was it uploaded? Was it stored somewhere? And perhaps most importantly, when did you first tell somebody what you saw? That's how investigators test a witness. Not by saying, I believe her, and not by saying, she must be lying. You test the story. And that's what I want to see happen here. Now, let's talk about the alleged video. Because this is where things could potentially become much more interesting. The witness says her husband recorded video. She apparently acknowledges that the video doesn't show everything. That's actually important. Because if somebody comes forward and says, I have a video that proves everything, I'm immediately going to want to see it. But if someone says, I have a video, it doesn't show much, but it captures part of what was happening, that's a more limited claim. And limited evidence can still be useful. Imagine for a moment that the video shows Nolan. even if it doesn't show an entire confrontation. That could potentially help establish his presence. Maybe it shows the location. Maybe it shows the people around him. Maybe it establishes the approximate time. Maybe it shows the boats in the background. Maybe it captures voices. Maybe there are details that the person who recorded it didn't even realize were important. That's why investigators don't just watch a piece of video once and say, "Okay, nothing there." They examine it. They preserve the original. They examine metadata. They compare timestamps. They compare lighting and environmental conditions. They compare it with phone records. They compare it with witness statements. They compare it with GPS data. They compare it with everything else. And that's the point I want to emphasize. Evidence becomes powerful when it connects with other evidence. One screenshot by itself might mean very little. One witness statement by itself might mean very little. One timestamp by itself might mean very little. But if all three point to the same thing, now you have something. That's why the alleged video matters. Not because we're calling it a smoking gun, but because it could potentially become another piece of the puzzle. Now, there's another issue here. And this is where we have to talk about the witness herself. Because the lawyers in the clip raised an important question. Did she actually give this information to law enforcement? That's a legitimate question. And I want to explain why. If you're watching this on TikTok or YouTube, it can feel like posting something publicly is the same thing as giving evidence to investigators. It isn't. You can post something to 500,000 people. That doesn't mean the sheriff's office has received the original video. It doesn't mean investigators have interviewed you. It doesn't mean your phone has been examined. It doesn't mean your statement has been documented. And it certainly doesn't mean the evidence has been authenticated. So if this witness really has information, the best thing she can do is make sure the appropriate investigators actually receive it, not just social media, law enforcement. Because ultimately, that's where the evidence needs to go. And I think that's one of the most important messages coming out of this entire development. If you believe you saw something, don't just post it. Give it to investigators. If you have video, preserve the original. Don't repeatedly edit it. Don't add filters. Don't cut out pieces because they don't fit the story. Keep the original. If you have messages, preserve them. If you remember a specific time, write it down. If you remember where your boat was, document it. Because 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, your memory may change. That's just human nature. And that's why contemporaneous evidence is so valuable. Now let's talk about the phone. Because apparently the alleged altercation involved Nolan's phone. And that detail immediately jumps out. Why? Because Nolan's phone has already become one of the major issues in this case. So now we're hearing a witness claim that an argument allegedly involved Nolan's phone. Do you see why people are paying attention? But again, slow down. We cannot jump from, the witness says there was an argument over a phone, to, the phone contains evidence of a crime. We don't know that. We have no idea what was on Nolan's phone. We don't know whether somebody actually took it. We don't know why the argument allegedly occurred. We don't know who had the phone. We don't know what happened to it afterward. And we certainly don't know whether the phone contains evidence related to Nolan's death. That's exactly why a forensic examination matters. If investigators can establish what happened to that phone, when it was last active, who contacted Nolan? What communications occurred? What location data exists? And what activity happened around the relevant time? Then that could help reconstruct the timeline. And again, I'm not saying the phone will solve the case. I'm saying it's evidence that deserves proper examination. Now let's talk about the timeline. Because this is where I think this story gets extremely interesting. We've heard discussion about the Triton leaving around 4:30. We've also heard claims about Nolan being seen later. And we've heard references to witnesses potentially placing him on Horn Island around 5 or even 6 p.m. If those later sightings are independently confirmed, then we have a very important question. Who was Nolan with? That's it. That's the question. Not who killed him. Not who is guilty. Not who should be arrested. We're not there. The first question is simply, who was with Nolan after the boats left? Because if the boats left and Nolan remained, then someone needs to establish what happened during that period. And if Nolan was actually still on Horn Island at 5 or 6 p.m., that changes the timeline. But if those sightings are wrong, that changes the timeline too. This is why investigators need to reconcile the evidence. You don't choose the timeline you like. You build the timeline that the evidence supports. That's a huge difference. Now let's imagine the investigators have 3 pieces of information. Piece number 1. A boat's GPS data shows it left at 4:30. Piece number 2. A witness says Nolan was on the island at 5:30. Piece number 3. A phone record places Nolan somewhere else. Those things conflict. What do? You don't pick your favorite. You investigate the conflict. Maybe the GPS was wrong. Maybe the witness got the time wrong. Maybe the phone was somewhere else. Maybe Nolan's phone wasn't with Nolan. Maybe there was another boat. Maybe the timestamp was misunderstood. That's investigation. And that's why I'm actually encouraged by the DA's statement about examining evidence and following credible leads, because that's exactly what should happen. Now, the grand jury issue. This is another place where social media is going to get this wrong if we're not careful. You're going to see headlines saying, "Nolan Wells case now criminal," or "Grand jury means they know who did it." No, that's not what we can say. The DA has said information is being presented to a grand jury. That is significant. But it doesn't automatically mean the grand jury has concluded that a homicide occurred. It doesn't mean an indictment is guaranteed. And it doesn't tell us who a potential suspect might be. What it tells us is that there is an investigative process underway and evidence is being prepared for grand jury consideration. That's important. But let's not overstate it, because if we're going to demand transparency from investigators, we have to be transparent with our audience too. And that's something I want the Black Docket to be known for. If something is confirmed, we'll say it's confirmed. If something is alleged, we'll say it's alleged. If something is unverified, we'll say it's unverified. And if we don't know, we'll say, we don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying that. In fact, that's how you protect the integrity of the story. Now let's talk about the autopsy. Because this is another huge piece of the puzzle. We're hearing that the state autopsy has been completed, but the findings have not been publicly released, and until those findings are released, there are limitations on what anyone can responsibly conclude. The experts in the clip debated whether an alleged physical fight would normally produce certain injuries. That's an interesting discussion, but it is not the same thing as an official conclusion. If a forensic pathologist says, "Here's what I would expect to see," that's expert interpretation. If the official autopsy report says, "Here's what we observed," that's evidence from this particular case. Those are not the same thing. And we need both. Because maybe the official findings show injuries. Maybe they don't. Maybe there are findings that aren't publicly known yet. Maybe decomposition makes interpretation difficult. Maybe toxicology adds another piece. Maybe the cause of death remains difficult to establish. We don't know. And that's why the release of the official findings matters. Now, there's another thing in that clip that I want to address. The discussion about alcohol. This is one of those things that can become incredibly misleading online. Somebody says, "The witness had been drinking." And suddenly people say, "Then she's lying." No, that's not how evidence works. A person can drink alcohol and still accurately perceive an event. At the same time, intoxication can affect perception, memory, attention, and timing. So what investigators need to establish is, how much had she consumed? When? Where was she? How far away was she? What could she actually see? How long did she observe the incident? Did anything obstruct her view? Did she know Nolan? What identifying characteristics did she rely upon? Those are legitimate questions. But simply saying, "she drank," doesn't settle the matter. And simply saying, "she says she saw it," doesn't settle it either. That's why cross-examination exists. That's why investigators interview witnesses. That's why evidence gets compared. Because human memory isn't a video camera. People remember things differently. people estimate time differently. People can be mistaken. And sometimes people can also remember something accurately. The job is figuring out which is which. Now let's go back to the alleged altercation itself. There's another question I want to ask. Who was the young woman the witness says tried to stop the fight? Because if this witness account is accurate, that person could potentially be important. Not because she is automatically a suspect, not because she is automatically a witness, but because she may have seen something. If she was close enough to tell people to stop, what exactly did she see? Who was involved? What started the argument? What happened to Nolan's phone? What happened immediately afterward? Where did everybody go? Did she leave with anyone? Did she speak to anybody afterward? Did she tell anyone what she had seen? Those questions can potentially be answered, and that's why the witness account needs to be investigated rather than simply celebrated or dismissed online. Now let's talk about the friends, because they have their own account, and this is extremely important. If you're going to introduce a new witness who potentially challenges a timeline, you have to give the existing witnesses their fair consideration. The friends have said they left Nolan behind. They have given their explanations for why they left. They have spoken about the timeline. They've provided information to investigators. There have also been references to Life 360 data and other records supporting aspects of their movements. So now we have competing pieces of information that need to be reconciled. And I don't want to turn that into, the friends are lying. We don't know that. Nor do I want to say, the friends are telling the truth. We don't know that either. What we can say is, their account needs to be compared against the independent evidence. That's the standard. If their timeline matches GPS, good. If it matches phone records, good. If it matches witness accounts, even better. But if something doesn't match, investigators need to explain the discrepancy. That's how you establish credibility. Not through popularity. Not through interviews on YouTube. Not through TikTok followers. Through evidence. Now, let's talk about the alleged boat search discrepancy, because this could be important. We're hearing a claim that an MDMR report refers to one vessel as tidecraft, while another source refers to a tide line. If those are genuinely different vessels, that is something investigators should clarify. But let's be very careful. A spelling error, a transcription issue, a nickname, or an actual wrong vessel search are all different possibilities. We don't know which one we're dealing with. So I don't want anybody walking away from this video saying, authorities definitely searched the wrong boat. We can't establish that from the information currently presented. Instead, the question is, was the vessel identified in the report the same vessel that investigators intended to search? That's a very reasonable question. And if it was simply a clerical error, then explain it. If it wasn't, then that's obviously much more significant. Again, follow the evidence. Now here's another important issue. GPS, Life 360, phone records, boat electronics. These are incredibly valuable because they can potentially give us something that human memory cannot: time and location data. But even technology needs context. A GPS point tells you where a device was. It doesn't necessarily tell you where a person was. A phone can be separated from its owner. A Life 360 device can be inaccurate. A boat can carry multiple people. A phone can run out of battery. And a timestamp can be misunderstood. So technology doesn't replace witness testimony. It helps test it. That's the key. Imagine someone says, I was at the dock at 4:30. GPS says their phone was somewhere else. Now we have a question. Maybe they left the phone behind. Maybe the GPS isn't precise. Maybe their memory is wrong. Maybe they're lying. The evidence doesn't automatically answer which one. It tells investigators where to look. And that's exactly what we need here. Now, I want to bring us back to Nolan, because this is where I think true crime coverage can sometimes go wrong. We get so fascinated by the mystery that we forget what the mystery actually represents. A family lost their son. And today, Nolan should have been 19. That was yesterday. His birthday. 19 years old. Imagine being his mother. Imagine knowing that your son should be receiving birthday messages But you're instead watching people debate the circumstances surrounding his death. Imagine seeing strangers online argue about whether your child was telling the truth. Imagine seeing people who never met him discuss his final hours like they're discussing a television episode. That's got to be incredibly difficult. And that's why I want us to keep the humanity in this story. We can investigate. We can ask questions. We can demand answers. We can examine inconsistencies. But we don't have to dehumanize anyone to do that. And we certainly don't need to manufacture certainty. Nolan deserves the truth. His family deserves the truth. And the public deserves accurate information. Those things can exist together. Now let's imagine for a moment that this witness is completely credible. What would that actually change? It could potentially establish that Nolan was involved in an altercation. That's significant. It could potentially establish that his phone was involved in the dispute. That's significant. It could potentially establish that Nolan remained on or near the island at a particular time. That's significant. But then we still have another question. What happened after the witness left? That's the part we don't have. And this is why I keep coming back to that sentence. She says she didn't stay. She didn't see what happened afterward. So even if everything she says is true, there's still a gap. And that gap is critical. Because the witness account may tell us what happened before Nolan disappeared. It doesn't necessarily tell us what happened after. And that distinction is huge. Now, suppose the video confirms the altercation. What then? Investigators need to identify everyone in the video. They need to establish who was there. They need to establish when it happened. They need to determine what happened immediately afterward. They need to identify whether Nolan's phone was present. They need to examine whether anyone left the area. They need to compare that with GPS. They need to compare it with phone records. They need to compare it with statements. That's how you move from "we saw a fight" to "we understand what happened." Those are very different things. And that's why I don't want to call this alleged video a smoking gun. Maybe it's incredibly important. Maybe it isn't. We need to see it. And if investigators have it, they need to examine it. Now let's talk about what could happen next. The first thing I'm watching is the official autopsy findings. Because once those are released, we may know more about cause and manner of death. And that could change the entire conversation. If the findings point clearly toward drowning, then investigators can focus more heavily on how Nolan entered the water and what happened immediately before. If the findings raise questions about whether drowning occurred, that's obviously a very different situation. If there are injuries, we need to understand what caused them. If there aren't, that matters too. But again, we need the official report. The second thing I'm watching is the grand jury process. What evidence is presented? What conclusions are reached? Does the grand jury issue an indictment? Does it decline to indict? Does it lead to additional investigation? We don't know. The third thing I'm watching is the phone examination. That could potentially provide additional timeline information. And the fourth, perhaps most importantly, is whether investigators can independently verify this new witness. Because if they can, that's where this becomes much more significant. Now, I want to address something else. There's a tendency online to think if investigators haven't arrested somebody, they aren't investigating. That's not necessarily true. Investigations can take time, especially when the cause and manner of death are unresolved, especially when evidence is still being examined, especially when there are multiple witness accounts, especially when prosecutors are preparing information for a grand jury. The absence of an arrest does not prove nothing is happening. But the absence of public information also doesn't mean the public should simply stop asking questions. Both things can be true. Investigators can be working, and the public can still want transparency. The family can cooperate and still want safeguards. Witnesses can provide information and still need to have their accounts tested. That's the complexity of a case like this. Now here's what I think is the biggest question coming out of tonight's development. Not, did somebody kill Nolan? We're not there. The question is, what happened during Nolan's final hours? Because that's the heart of this. Who was he with? Where was he? What was happening around him? What happened to his phone? Who saw him last? What time was he last seen? What time did the boats leave? Was he still on the island afterward? Who can independently verify that? And what happened between that last confirmed sighting and the moment his body was recovered? That's the investigation. And if this new witness can help answer even one of those questions, then her account matters. If the video can establish even one part of that timeline, then the video matters. If the phone can establish even one part of that timeline, then the phone matters. If the autopsy can answer even one medical question, then the autopsy matters. That's how cases are solved, not with one magical piece of evidence. Usually, it's multiple pieces coming together. Now let's go back to the grand jury one more time, because I think this is something viewers need to understand. The DA's statement is actually very carefully worded. She talks about evidence. She talks about credible leads. She talks about witness interviews. She talks about presenting information to the grand jury. And she talks about protecting the integrity of the investigation. That's not the language of somebody saying, "We already know exactly what happened." It's the language of an investigation that is still unfolding. And that matters. Because if the state doesn't yet have all the answers, we shouldn't pretend that we do. We're following the investigation. We're not replacing it. That's the role of this channel. Now, if you are watching this and you have information about Nolan's final hours, please don't turn that information into an internet performance. If you genuinely saw something, preserve what you have. Contact the appropriate authorities. If you have video, keep the original. If you have messages, don't delete them. If you have photographs, don't edit them. If you know a specific time or location, write it down. Because if the information is legitimate, the investigators need the original evidence. Not a TikTok recreation. Not a screenshot of a screenshot. Not a reaction video. The evidence itself. That's how we get closer to the truth. And y'all, that's exactly what I hope comes out of this. Not another social media war. Not another week of people screaming at each other. Not another cycle of, believe this person, don't believe that person. I want evidence. I want the official autopsy findings. I want the phone examination. I want investigators to establish the timeline. I want the alleged video examined. I want witness statements compared. I want the boat movements reconstructed. And then, whatever the evidence says, that's what we follow. Even if it contradicts our favorite theory. That's what justice requires. Now, let's talk about the possibility that this witness account turns out to be wrong. Because we need to leave room for that. Maybe she misidentified Nolan. Maybe the event happened at a different time. Maybe it wasn't the people she thinks it was. Maybe the video doesn't show what people online think it shows. Maybe the alleged phone dispute was something completely different. Maybe the altercation had nothing to do with Nolan's death. All of those are possible. And that's okay. Because investigating a lead doesn't mean endorsing the conclusion. Investigators investigate leads precisely because they don't know whether they're true. That's the mindset we need. And if the witness is ultimately proven wrong, that doesn't mean the investigation failed. It means a lead was tested. That's how investigations work. Likewise, if the witness is proven correct, then we have a new piece of evidence. Either way, we learned something. And that's progress. Now think about how different this is from the earlier conversation about the NOP. When the NOP entered the case, the question was, why did they step in? Now the question is, what does this new witness tell investigators about Nolan's final hours? Those are two different developments. And if the NOC is bringing additional investigative resources into the case, this is exactly the kind of information their team would presumably want to examine. Not because the witness automatically proves anything, but because credible leads need to be investigated. And if there's video, preserve it. Authenticate it, analyze it. That's what investigators do. Now we're getting close to the heart of this entire story, because at some point, the noise has to stop. The TikToks stop. The theories stop. The speculation stops. And somebody has to sit down with the evidence and reconstruct what happened. Minute by minute, location by location, person by person. And that's what I want to see. I want a timeline. A real timeline. Not, somebody said this. Not, somebody heard that. Not, a little birdie told me. I want 4:30, this happened. 5 o'clock, this happened. 5:30, this happened. 6 o'clock, this happened. This person was here. This device was here. This boat was here. This phone was active. This witness saw this. That's how you build the picture. And when two pieces don't match, you investigate the mismatch. That's where truth often lives, in the contradiction. Now, there is something else I want you to remember. The fact that we're talking about Nolan's final hours doesn't mean we should forget the days before them. His family deserves to know the full story, not just the final moment. What led up to the trip? Who was there? What communications happened? What was Nolan expecting to do? What did his friends understand about the plans? What happened to his belongings? What happened to his phone? Every detail matters. Because sometimes the answer to a mystery isn't sitting in the final 5 minutes. Sometimes it's sitting in a message from the night before, a location record, a phone call, a photograph, a witness who remembers something everybody else forgot. That's why investigators have to examine everything. And that's why the public shouldn't decide that one detail is the entire case. Now, I want to return to that alleged altercation one last time. Because if it happened, it is important. But the word if has to stay there until investigators verify it. That's not me being negative. That's me being responsible. If it happened, find out who was there. If it was recorded, preserve the recording. If Nolan's phone was involved, find out what happened to it. If there was a young woman who tried to stop the confrontation, identify her. If there were other witnesses, interview them. If someone saw Nolan afterward, document when and where. If someone saw the boats leave, document that. And if the timelines don't match, figure out why. That's the path forward. Not another accusation. Not another viral theory. Verification. And as we wait for that, Nolan's family continues to wait too. That's the part that should never get lost. Because while we're talking about timelines, they're talking about their son. While we're analyzing screenshots, they're remembering Nolan. While we're debating theories, they're waiting for answers. And that is why this case deserves serious coverage. Not because it's entertaining, not because it's controversial, but because a young man's life ended, and his family still wants to understand why. Today he should have been 19. And that makes this story even harder, because birthdays are supposed to mark another year of life. For Nolan, it marks another year that his family doesn't get to celebrate with him. So whatever your theory is, whatever side you think you're on, remember the person at the center, Nolan Wells. Not the case, not the mystery, not the TikTok story, Nolan. And if this investigation ultimately establishes that what happened was an accident, then that's what the evidence needs to show. If it establishes something else, then that's what the evidence needs to show. But whatever the answer is, his family deserves to hear it. And the public deserves to know that the conclusion was reached through evidence. Not pressure, not social media, not politics, not popularity. Evidence. So, after everything we've gone through tonight, here are the questions I'm watching. Number 1. Can this new witness be independently verified? Number 2. Does the alleged video actually show Nolan? Number 3. What is the timestamp on that video? Number 4. Was Nolan still on Horn Island after the other boats left? Number 5. Who was with him during that period? Number 6. What happened to Nolan's phone? Number 7. What does the official state autopsy actually say? Number 8. What evidence is being presented to the grand jury? Number 9. Was the boat identified in the MDMR report actually the correct vessel? And number 10, perhaps the biggest question of all, what happened between Nolan's last confirmed sighting and the discovery of his body? Those are the questions. And tonight, we have more information. But we don't have all the answers. And I think that's an important distinction. Because sometimes people hear new development and expect the entire case to be solved. That's not what happened here. What happened is that another lead has emerged, a potentially important one, a witness account, a possible video, a possible timeline issue, and now investigators have to determine what, if anything, those things actually prove. And that's where we're going to leave it tonight. Not with a verdict, not with an accusation, not with a theory presented as fact, but with a question. What happened to Nolan Wells? And perhaps, even more specifically, who was with Nolan during his final hours? If you're watching this from Mississippi, Georgia, Texas, California, New York, Florida, or anywhere else in the United States, I want to hear from you. And if you're watching from outside the United States, I want to hear from you too. Where are you watching from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. And if you've been following Nolan's story, tell me what you think about this new witness. Do you think the alleged video should become a major part of the investigation? Do you think the timeline needs to be reconstructed again? What do you think about the claims surrounding Nolan's phone? And what do you want to see investigators clarify next? But please, keep it respectful. You can question. You can disagree. You can challenge the timeline. You can challenge the evidence. But don't declare someone guilty based on something that hasn't been proven. Because we're not here to conduct a trial in the comment section. We're here to follow the evidence. And if something is proven wrong, we'll say it. If something is confirmed, we'll say it. If something remains uncertain, we'll say that too. Because Nolan deserves something better than an internet theory. He deserves the truth. And his family deserves answers. So if you want to stay with us as this investigation develops, subscribe to the Black Docket, turn on your notifications, share this video with somebody who's been following Nolan's case. And if you believe stories like this deserve serious, evidence-based coverage, hit that like button. It helps this video reach more people. But more importantly, it tells the platform that this is the kind of investigation you want to see more of. And before we go, one more time, happy 19th birthday, Nolan. You should have been here. You should have been celebrating. You should have been making another memory with your family. Instead, people are still asking what happened. So today, we remember you. We say your name, and we keep looking for answers. Keep Nolan's name alive. This is the Black Docket, and we'll be watching.